The aluminum bat felt cold in his hands as Lieutenant David Morrison stood frozen in his own bedroom doorway. His wife of 7 years was tangled in sheets that weren't supposed to be touched until he returned from deployment. The neighbor, the same man who'd helped shovel their driveway last winter, was scrambling for his clothes. What happened in the next 60 seconds would destroy 3 families, end a military career, and land everyone involved in a Los Angeles courtroom, facing charges that would make national headlines. This is the story of how one moment of betrayal triggered a chain reaction of violence that shocked an entire community. Lieutenant David Morrison was a decorated officer in the United States Army, stationed at Fort Irwin in California's Mojave Desert. For 12 years, he'd served his country with distinction, 2 tours in Afghanistan, a Bronze Star, and a reputation for staying calm under pressure. He was the kind of soldier other soldiers looked up to, the kind of man who never lost his composure. Until October 17th, 2023. David lived in a quiet neighborhood in the Los Feliz district of Los Angeles with his wife, Jennifer, and their 2 children, ages 9 and 6. It was the kind of street where neighbors knew each other's names, where kids rode bikes until the streetlights came on, where people waved from their porches. Safe, comfortable, normal. 3 houses down lived the Kowalski family. Robert Kowalski was a freelance contractor, 42 years old, married with teenage kids. He was the neighborhood handyman, always willing to help fix a leaky faucet or jumpstart a dead battery. When David was deployed, Robert would check on Jennifer and the kids, make sure everything was okay. He was being a good neighbor, or so everyone thought. David had been away for 8 months on his latest deployment. The separation was brutal, but Jennifer's messages kept him going. She'd send photos of the kids, updates about their lives, voice notes telling him how much she missed him. He counted down the days until he could hold her again. His unit was scheduled to return on October 20th, but David managed to catch an earlier flight. He wanted to surprise his family. Imagine their faces when he walked through that door 3 days early. He could already picture his kids jumping into his arms, Jennifer's tears of joy. He landed at LAX on the afternoon of October 17th, caught an Uber home, his duffel bag slung over his shoulder. The California sun felt warm on his face after months in the desert. He was smiling as he walked up his driveway. The front door was unlocked. That should have been his first clue. The house was quiet when David stepped inside. Too quiet for a Tuesday afternoon. The kids should have been home from school by now, but the living room was empty. Jennifer's car was in the driveway, so she had to be home. He set his duffel bag down in the entryway, listening. That's when he heard it, a sound coming from upstairs. Muffled voices, movement. David's military training kicked in. Something felt wrong. His heart started pounding, but not with excitement anymore. With dread. With a creeping sense that the life he'd been dreaming about for 8 months was about to shatter. He moved quietly up the stairs, each step deliberate. The sounds were coming from the master bedroom. The door was slightly ajar. Through the crack, he could see movement, shadows on the wall. And then he heard his wife's voice. But she wasn't alone. David pushed the door open. What he saw would be burned into his memory forever. Jennifer and Robert Kowalski were in his bed, the bed he'd shared with his wife for 7 years, the bed where his children had been conceived, the bed that represented everything sacred about his marriage. Time seemed to stop. Jennifer screamed. Robert froze, his face draining of color. For a moment, nobody moved. 3 people locked in the worst possible moment of their lives. Then something inside David Morrison snapped. He'd faced enemy fire in Kandahar without flinching. He'd maintained composure during mortar attacks, during ambushes, during moments when most men would have crumbled. But this was different. This was betrayal at a level he couldn't process. This was his wife, his partner, his best friend, the mother of his children, with the neighbor he'd trusted, the man he'd shaken hands with, the man he'd thanked for looking after his family. David turned and walked out of the bedroom. Not because he was leaving, because he needed a weapon. In his son's room, leaning against the wall next to a pile of baseball equipment, was an aluminum bat. David grabbed it. The weight felt familiar in his hands. Solid, substantial, lethal if used with force. He walked back to the bedroom. Robert was trying to get dressed, hopping on one foot as he pulled on his pants. Jennifer had wrapped the sheet around herself, her face pale with terror. She was saying something, pleading, crying, words tumbling over each other, but David couldn't hear her. There was a roaring in his ears, a white-hot fury that drowned out everything else. "Get out," David said. His voice was eerily calm, controlled. That's what made it so terrifying. Robert raised his hands. "Listen, man, I'm sorry, Get out!" The explosion came without warning. David swung the bat, not at Robert, but at the dresser. The mirror shattered, glass exploding across the room. He swung again, demolishing the lamp on the nightstand. Again, and the wooden frame of the bed cracked. He was destroying everything in the room, each impact punctuated by a guttural scream that came from somewhere deep inside him. Jennifer was screaming too, backing into the corner. Robert tried to run for the door, but David was faster. He moved to block the exit, the bat held across his chest. "You think you can just leave?" David's voice was shaking now, the control slipping. "You think you can destroy my family and just walk away?" This is where things went from bad to catastrophic. Robert made a choice. Instead of trying to de-escalate, instead of apologizing or reasoning, he tried to fight his way out. He lunged at David, reaching for the bat. Big mistake. David Morrison was a trained soldier. Robert Kowalski was a contractor with a beer gut. The confrontation lasted maybe 10 seconds, but the damage done in those 10 seconds would have consequences that reached far beyond that bedroom. Before we continue with what happened next, if you're invested in this story, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. We cover the most compelling true crime cases from around the world. Stories that reveal the darkest sides of human nature. Drop a comment telling us what you would have done in David's situation. Now, let's get back to the chaos that erupted in that Los Angeles home. The neighbors heard the screaming first. Mrs. Chen from next door called 911, reporting sounds of violence coming from the Morrison house. Within minutes, Los Angeles Police Department officers were racing toward the scene, not knowing what they'd find when they arrived. Inside the house, the bedroom looked like a war zone. Furniture was destroyed. Glass covered the floor. Blood spattered the walls. Not much, but enough to tell investigators that things had gotten physical. Robert Kowalski was on the floor, conscious but injured. He'd suffered a broken arm and multiple contusions. Later, doctors would document bruising across his ribs, a possible concussion, and lacerations from broken glass. He was in bad shape, but he'd live. David stood over him, the bat still in his hands, chest heaving. Jennifer was hysterical, begging David to stop, begging him to think about their children. The children. In the chaos, everyone had forgotten about them. They were supposed to be at soccer practice, but their game had been canceled. They'd gone to a friend's house instead. They weren't home when their father discovered the affair. They weren't there when he grabbed the bat. They weren't witnesses to their family being torn apart. But they'd have to live with the aftermath forever. When police arrived, they found David sitting on the front steps, the bat beside him. He wasn't running. He wasn't resisting. He looked like a man who just watched his entire life collapse and didn't have the energy to care what happened next. "I'm Lieutenant David Morrison, U.S. Army," he said to the officers. "I'm not armed. The man inside is injured and needs medical attention." Professional? Composed. Even in the worst moment of his life, his military training held. Robert was taken to Cedars-Sinai Medical Center by ambulance. Jennifer gave a statement to police, though she could barely speak through her tears. David was arrested and charged with assault with a deadly weapon, destruction of property, and, because of the severity of Robert's injuries, aggravated assault. The case made headlines immediately. "Decorated soldier attacks wife's lover," screamed the local news. The story had everything: military service, adultery, Violence, suburban drama. Within hours, it was trending on social media. As investigators pieced together what happened, a more complex picture emerged. This wasn't a simple case of a jealous husband losing control. This was a story about trust betrayed at every level. Jennifer and Robert's affair had been going on for 6 months. It started innocently enough, Robert helping with repairs around the house, Jennifer offering him coffee as thanks. Conversations that lasted a little too long. Text messages that became a little too personal. Then one day, the line was crossed. Robert's wife, Patricia, had suspected something was wrong for months. Her husband was distant, secretive with his phone, making excuses to leave the house. She'd confronted him twice, and twice he'd denied everything. She'd even considered hiring a private investigator, but talked herself out of it. She didn't want to know. Now she knew. David's military record became a central part of the case. His defense attorney argued that his client was suffering from undiagnosed PTSD from his combat deployments. The betrayal, combined with the shock of discovery, triggered a response that David couldn't control. He wasn't trying to kill Robert. He was lashing out at the destruction of everything he'd fought to protect. The prosecution painted a different picture. They argued that David had multiple opportunities to walk away. He'd left the bedroom to get the bat. That showed premeditation. He'd blocked the door. That showed intent to harm. Yes, he'd been betrayed, but that didn't give him the right to commit assault. The case raised uncomfortable questions about vigilante justice and the limits of self-control. What would you do if you came home and found your spouse in bed with someone else? Does betrayal justify violence? Where's the line between understandable human emotion and criminal behavior? Social media was divided. Some people defended David, saying Robert got what he deserved. Others argued that nothing justified what David did, that he should have walked away and filed for divorce. The comment sections became battlegrounds. Meanwhile, 3 families were dealing with the fallout. David was released on bail but stripped of his security clearance pending the outcome of the case. His military career, the thing he'd dedicated his adult life to, was effectively over. Even if he avoided prison, he'd likely face a dishonorable discharge. Robert recovered physically but filed a civil lawsuit against David for medical expenses and emotional distress. His marriage to Patricia was over. She filed for divorce within 2 weeks of the incident. Jennifer faced the hardest road of all. She'd lost her marriage, her reputation, and nearly lost her children when David's family petitioned for custody. She'd have to explain to her kids why their father was in jail, why they couldn't live in their house anymore, why their family was destroyed. The trial began in March 2024, 5 months after the incident. The Los Angeles County Courthouse was packed with spectators, media, and advocates on both sides of the case. The prosecution presented medical evidence of Robert's injuries, photos of the destroyed bedroom, Jennifer's tearful testimony about fearing for her life during the attack. They built a case that David Morrison was a dangerous man who'd lost control and needed to be held accountable. The defense countered with David's military record, 12 years of exemplary service, commendations, character witnesses who testified that David had never shown violence before. They brought in a psychologist who testified about PTSD, about the psychological impact of deployment, about how betrayal trauma can trigger extreme responses in people who've experienced combat stress. David himself took the stand. He was composed, articulate, and brutally honest. "I'm not proud of what I did," he told the jury. "I'm not making excuses. When I saw my wife with that man in our bed, something broke inside me. For 8 months, I'd been thinking about coming home, about holding my family again. That was what kept me going during the worst moments overseas. And in 1 second, all of it was a lie." He paused, his voice catching. "I grabbed that bat because I wanted to destroy something. I wanted the room to look like how I felt inside. Shattered. Did I hit Robert? Yes, I'm not going to claim I didn't. But I wasn't trying to kill him. If I'd wanted him dead, he'd be dead. I'm trained for that. I needed him to hurt like I was hurting." The courtroom was silent. "I know that doesn't make it right," David continued. "I know I crossed a line, but I want everyone to understand. I just spent 8 months away from my family protecting a country that let this happen under my own roof. The Army teaches you to neutralize threats, and in that moment, Robert Kowalski was the biggest threat to my family I'd ever faced." The jury deliberated for 3 days. The verdict came back mixed. David was found guilty of assault and property damage, but not guilty of aggravated assault with intent to cause serious harm. The jury believed his claim that he wasn't trying to kill Robert. The judge sentenced David to 18 months in prison with credit for time served, 3 years of probation, mandatory anger management and PTSD counseling, and restitution to Robert for medical expenses. It was a compromise verdict, acknowledging that David had committed a crime while recognizing the extreme circumstances that provoked it. Today, David Morrison is out of prison, but his life looks nothing like it did before October 17, 2023. His military career is over. He received an other-than-honorable discharge. He lost his pension, his benefits, his identity as a soldier. His marriage to Jennifer ended in divorce. She was granted primary custody of the children, with David receiving supervised visitation until completing his probation. He sees his kids every other weekend, and while they're slowly rebuilding their relationship, the damage runs deep. David works construction now, doing the kind of manual labor that helps him avoid thinking too much. He attends therapy twice a week and says he's learning to process his emotions in healthier ways. He's also become an advocate for PTSD awareness in veterans. Speaking at support groups about the importance of getting help before reaching a breaking point, Robert Kowalski left Los Angeles. His divorce from Patricia was finalized, and he moved to Arizona to start over. He declined to comment for any media coverage of the case. Jennifer still lives in the Los Angeles area but had to move to a different neighborhood. The stigma of the affair followed her, and she lost friendships, faced judgment from other parents at her kids' school, and struggled to rebuild her life. She's also in therapy, working through the guilt of what her choices set in motion. The Morrison children are in counseling too. At ages 10 and 7 now, they're old enough to understand that something terrible happened, but still too young to fully process it. They know their parents aren't together anymore. They know their dad went to prison. They know their family will never be what it was. The case of David Morrison raises questions that don't have easy answers. What do we owe to our partners? What are the limits of forgiveness? When does betrayal justify action? And how do we help veterans transition back to civilian life without the psychological support they desperately need? One thing is certain: that October afternoon in Los Angeles destroyed multiple lives in ways that can never be fully repaired, all because of choices made in a moment of weakness and a response made in a moment of rage. If you found this story compelling, make sure you're subscribed to the channel and hit that notification bell so you never miss our deep dives into true crime cases. Leave a comment below with your thoughts on this case. Was justice served? Could this have been prevented? And check out our other videos exploring the psychology of crime and the justice system. Thanks for watching, and remember, the choices we make in our worst moments define us just as much as the choices we make in our best.